This is my second time in Kenya. I was here as a student about 20 years ago, so I'm happy to be back here. And I just want to thank the Kenya Institute of Bankers for the warm hospitality that we in the Bahamas delegation have experienced over the past 2 or so days that we've been here. So let's give the organizers a round of applause for the hard work that they've done. I've been asked to look at the topic of transformational leadership and management challenges in financial services. Now, the previous panel has spoken to the challenges and the opportunities that the current operating environment presents. And so, I won't go over all of those challenges and opportunities, but I will say that really, transformational leadership is about how we drive those changes, how we execute, how do we take advantage of the opportunities that the current environment presents to us. It's about bringing about change. It's about meeting challenges head on. And I believe that there are 2 things that we as leaders, if we wish to be transformational and bring about change, that we should focus on. But before I do that, I thought it was important to set the stage just a little with respect to, and that's an interesting quote about what transformational leadership is, and I tried to summarize it in my intro, my short intro just now. This is what happens, right? Okay, so the current operating environment. We heard about increased regulation and increased competition. And a direct result of all of that regulation and competition has been a consolidation globally in the banking sector. We see it not only in the USA and Europe, but we see it in Africa, we see it in the Caribbean. And these changes in the operating environment have an impact on people and profits. So we spoke to increased capital requirements and the fact that in some of our home countries, you've seen the reduction of the number of banks. These are the numbers from Nigeria. In Kenya, we've seen a consolidation of the sector as well. And even where I'm from, in the Caribbean, we've had RBC, Royal Bank of Canada, where I work, acquire RBTT in Trinidad and Tobago. The result of this, like I said, has influenced both people and profits. And so today, I want to focus on 2 things: effective change management and creating a culture of innovation. From our previous panel, we heard about the need for us to embrace technology, and the only way we can do that is as institutes and as financial institutions if we engage a culture of innovation and we have effective change management. So what is this exactly? And once I've laid the groundwork, I'm going to give you some work to do and try and put the principles into practice. So we are told that change is the only constant. So we talk about Basel III, we talk about other regulations. That's now, and I'm sure that there will be more change to come. But transformational leaders can find managing a change both rewarding and challenging. Challenging when you've never seen the change before. Challenging because jobs may be impacted. For us as banking institutes, you may find an emphasis on cost management. I know in the Bahamas, we've seen an emphasis on reducing costs because of all the changes. If you're investing in making sure that compliance is up to date, making sure that systems and controls are in place to deal with responses, for example, to FATCA, that's something that we are dealing with in the Bahamas, then you find that there's less resources to invest in your people. And so you find that institutes, therefore, have to be really ready to manage the change that could impact the work that they do. Now I wanted to talk a bit about change and how people respond to change. And this here diagram outlines what we call the change curve. And if we are to be transformational leaders, we have to be able to manage the responses to change. So as regulations change, as institutions merge, you will find that your people will respond differently. You will find that as banking institutes, you have to respond differently to what is going on in your operating environment. And so I think this is a useful tool to refer to as we reflect on how transformational leaders ought to manage change. So in stage one, we see shock and denial. Most people, when there is a change in their operating environment, there is shock and denial, and this is followed by resistance. How can this happen? This cannot happen. So I don't know how you as institutes are responding to changes in your environment, but you may find that at first there is this, I don't know how we're going to cope, and then there is, we must stop this. And then the next stage is, the natural stage, is to say, well, how can we make this work for us as institutes, as financial institutions? And then there is the last stage where once you've thought it all through, you've factored in what value added you can bring to the table, then you say, we can deal with this. There is the rebuilding stage. There is the stage of looking at what new courses do we have to offer? How can we engage our financial institutions to see that there is a value added in the work that we do, in the courses that we provide? And key to all of this is really communication. So in terms of managing responses to change, it's really about the level of communication that you engage your key stakeholders in. So if there's a change in your environment, the first thing you want to do is to communicate. You want to communicate often. In this way, you help to manage the shock and the denial that is associated with change. And then to deal with the anger and the fear of change or the resistance, as organizations, this could be the most dangerous stage where people resist change, and this could really hold back any progress that you want to make as a transformational leader. And therefore, you need to be clear in your communication, and people need to understand why some of the changes are taking place. Again, like I said, communication is key at every stage in the change management process as leaders. Transformational leaders ought to be focused on execution, making things happen. It's not just about having a vision. It's not just about having an objective if you cannot make that objective a reality. And I expect that we have a lot of transformational leaders here, and your focus every day is about executing on the objectives that you have set for your institutes. And these are some of the barriers to change. I'm not going to go through them in any detail because I really, like I said, want to get you talking. I want you to put some of the things that you've heard me say into practice. Okay? And this here outlines, many of you would have heard about Carter's 8-step change model. This sort of summarizes what transformational leaders and change leaders ought to be concerned with when they are trying to respond to changes in their operating environment. Key again, I only want to emphasize, is communication, removing any obstacles to change, and to make sure that you are engaging people who will have to have buy-in to make sure that whatever you're trying to achieve is actually executed upon. So that was quick. And I wanted to get to this point because I wanted to see where you were as transformational leaders and persons who are charged with making sure that the professionals who work in our sector are ready for change, are able to execute upon goals that are set, and are able to cope in the new global environment that we find ourselves in. So, you are an executive director at the Global Financial Services Institute. Your council or board has asked you to implement a change that is much bigger than anything that you've done before. Over time, it is likely to involve moving employees to other jobs and perhaps even downsizing. You are concerned with the scope of the change and that it will scare your people and impact their motivation and performance at a time when you need it most. What should you do? So there you are as an institute facing a major change. Perhaps increased regulations has led to cuts in budgets around training and people. What are you going to do that's different? How will you get buy-in from your team to make sure that the impact of the change is not so great that they resist and that you're able to continue to respond in the changing environment? So these are a few options. And I'll just read them through, and I want you to talk among yourselves. So you're facing this change that your council or board has introduced. Are you just going to meet with your board to discuss the implications of the change and then develop your action plan? Are you going to consider the implications of the change to your people, taking into account their personal needs? Look for ways to allow them to excel because of the change, and then meet with your council or board to discuss the ideas that you have. Will you keep up to date on the upcoming changes, but don't mention them to your team just yet until you have a lot more information about the change? Or will you share information about the impending change that you receive with your people as soon as you receive it? So as a transformational leader, there's no right or wrong answer. But one of these answers, or there's a scale, some of these answers or responses are better than others. But as we seek to face the challenging environment and you're driving the change as a leader, what do you think is the best solution in here, and what approach would you take? I'll give you 2 minutes.
I like the last one.
And they talk about like the bill. Oh, I ain't just been anyway.
Yeah, you are.
Sorry, she just sort of sit up. She don't want to get back to me. You want to know Vaughn?
I go over there so she could tell you what I look back.
I get a good shot from you, man. Okay.
No, I should actually run out with this.
Who's in here?
Still missing the shit.
I'll just go back so you can look at the scenario again that you're facing. Read it through. And I'm going to ask Miguel if he has that floor mic. So maybe if you could indicate who wants to take a stab at this, and we'll hear some of your responses and talk about it a bit. Managing change is probably one of the greatest challenges that any leader will face. Certainly we face a lot of change in the financial services sector, and how you respond to it can determine whether your institute or whether the financial institution that you work with actually survives the change, responds in the right way, remains profitable, or whether you have a highly engaged team. Anyone ready to take a stab at the responses?
Hello, Kevin Moore from the CISI in the UK. You could mix and match a few of them, but I think if I'm going to nail my colours to the mast, I'll go for B as the first step. To think through the implications of the changes and to try and work out what it's actually mean for different people in the organisation. I think the only sort of phrase I pick up from there and say might not work is that not everybody is necessarily going to excel because of change. There could be some winners, there might equally be some losers. You can't always work everything in a way that everybody wins. But thinking through it properly from that perspective is probably the best way, rather than jumping in with your plans first off without thinking it through. And certainly wouldn't go for D and sort of set the horses running by telling them all about what might happen when you don't really have any idea. I suspect it's hard to do people within a few minutes. So that's my initial thoughts.
Any dissenting views? Like I said, there's no right or wrong answer here, but it's trying to pick out which approach will work best. Okay, there's a part 2 to this case study, so we'll talk about the response for this one. You're spot on. Really, the best answer that we could have gotten here would have been B, to consider the implications of the change to your people, taking into account their personal needs, looking for ways to allow them to excel because of the change, and meet with your council or board to discuss the ideas. The emphasis here is, just as you said, your response needs to be well thought out, and as change leaders, you need to think first and then act. Before you communicate, you want to make sure that you understand what the change is about, that you have formulated an action plan to respond to it, such that you can get the buy-in of all the key stakeholders. So that's the first part. Now, it turns out that the board and council have met again and determined that the Global Financial Services Institute should merge with another training institute. Now, this could be a bank merging with another bank, but in this instance, it's 2 financial institutes. You've already been working with your employees on the integration of people from a local college that found it difficult recruiting students in the challenging economic environment. It is not the first time that you have had to do this over the past 5 years. So while it is a big task, at least you and your team have some experience with integration. Having said that, one of your employees was very outspoken and resistant the last time this happened, fearing that the merger could lead to some redundancies. Well, he is back at it again. Not publicly this time, but you have been told by others that he is voicing his dissatisfaction with the change whenever he gets the opportunity. What do you do? Do you meet with him and ask for his support regarding the new changes? Do you meet with him about his behavior and ask him to explain why he's behaving the way that he is? Do you simply observe his behavior over the next couple of days to gather evidence that what you have been told is happening in fact, and then meet with him? Or do you meet with him and ask him how he feels about the change and any concerns you can help him address? Then explain your expectations regarding his support for the change. So, you think about this. 2 minutes. So you have a resistor in the mix. How do you handle him? No, you don't fire him right away. These are the responses. I'll go back to the slide with the scenario for you to read through. How do you respond to somebody who is resisting change in your organization?
something most of the institutes are facing these days. It's not a case study in isolation. There's this broad flavor of asking all of us to merge with private institutions. You know what I did? I did not merge. I accepted with them and started understanding as to how the institute can address. We were able to convince the board also. Completely different set of, but the situation is the same. There's a lot of pressure to merge, a lot of pressure to do things differently. But I found that the employer was correct. There is a need for maintaining those grounds. So we not any of this for action.
So anybody wants to tell me which one of these you think is the best way to respond?
I would go with D. I think when you're trying to implement change, it's important to understand whatever the objections are. And if you don't meet with them, rightfully understand whatever those objections are and help them understand your perspective and why there's a need for change. So I think D is the best answer here.
Absolutely. So you're dealing with the issue head on, you're dealing with it directly, you're giving the resistor an opportunity to speak, and then you're setting some expectations. So certainly that would be the best approach. And underlying all of this, like I said, is communication. So, change management, I believe, is a transformational leadership challenge that we face, and how you respond to your changing environment will determine how well your institution does. Be it a bank or other financial institution, be it a learning or training body such as our banking institutes. We heard a lot about technology. We heard a lot about the opportunities that exist in our current operating environment. Innovation, therefore, I believe, and creating a culture of innovation is a challenge that we as leaders face. And whether we are able to create a culture of innovation again is going to determine whether we achieve those business objectives that we set for our institutions. So the first question is, what is innovation? And there's no right or wrong answer. I believe that innovation is really all of these things. It doesn't have to be invention. It can be improving or enhancing existing products and services, just simply doing something different or doing something better. But you want to get innovation and a culture of innovation ingrained in the culture of your organization. So institutes can help to drive innovation through the courses that you offer. In the Bahamas, for example, we're now focusing on introducing a new international wealth management diploma. We believe that this is a response to our changing operating environment. We see the Bahamas being positioned as a wealth management center, and we said, what can we do differently? What can we do better? How can we improve our course offerings to meet the needs of the market that we are in? And that was our response to sort of be innovative. Institutes must be innovative to survive. Your respective financial institutions must see the value that you add to their team if they are going to support you. It doesn't make sense to continue to offer the same courses if you find that your financial institutions no longer see the value added in those courses. Maybe they're doing their own training in-house. Many institutions have the support of large group or corporate offices and corporate training programs. So what are you going to do differently? Who are you going to be focusing on? Innovation may require you as institutes to look outside of the traditional financial institutions, outside of banks. What about credit unions, who perhaps are not as developed or sophisticated when it comes to training? What about insurance companies? All of that can be embodied in innovation as you as institutes seek to respond to the changing operating environment. The last piece of the case study, because I'm getting the time, but I wanted to put you to work today. I wanted to boast a little bit of the fact that I'm with RBC Royal Bank of Canada, and I believe that we have a culture of innovation. And in some quarters we have what we call, in some of our jurisdictions, we do what is called an innovation challenge. where employees are challenged to improve the way that we deliver products and services. So, last piece of the case study, and then we'll go to the panel. So, I'll call it GFI. GFI is eventually integrated, and the recent merger has received some bad publicity because of downsizing, and some courses that were previously offered had to be dropped. The council and board feel as if the institute, rather than gaining market share, appears to be losing it to the competition. A meeting was called, and the council stressed the need for innovation. There is a need to enhance current course offerings and target new markets. What initiatives can the institute introduce to encourage innovation? What can you do differently to appeal to your market? There are no responses. I want you to think about it, and I just want to hear a couple of your ideas before I list a few. How can you as institute respond to your changing environment? Anyone willing to share their ideas before I take my leave?
I mean, since the bank is downsizing and the cost seems to be the major component of the decisions of cutting down the courses, and the budgeting seems to be the most important bit. I think how the institutes can perhaps bring about similar courses that they used to offer, but give it a new flavor in terms of offering it by e-learning perhaps. That is something which is getting good momentum in the industry. Banks would like to reach out to the larger audience in a shorter duration of time and still save quite a lot of money. So I think e-learning would be something worth considering.
Absolutely. Any other ideas? Okay. Here we go. So as institutes, I leave you with this. Stay abreast of the changes in the current operating environment. You need to be a value added to the financial institutions in your respective jurisdictions. Build strong relationships with stakeholders. You want to get to know the persons in government. You want to know the heads of the banks and all of the regulators so that they understand what you have to offer. In fact, the work that you do can be a value added to the jurisdiction. When you try to sell your jurisdiction as what we call in the Bahamas a center of excellence, key to that is training, key to that is professionalism. And something that you may want to think about is focus on executive education. You want to engage the CEOs in your respective jurisdictions. Engage them through courses in change leadership and strategic management. And I say thank you.